Hello again, dear students, and welcome to the Science 12-11 lab number 4. This lab in particular has to do with the identification of metal cations in solution. For that, we're going to use three properties that these particular ions have in solution. The first property is going to be the color that they give to the solution. The second property is the color those ions give when they are introduced in a flame. And the third is going to be how each one of these ions behaves in the presence of a precipitating agent. We're going to be using as precipitating agent ammonium sulfate and ammonium hydroxide. So by following the solubility rules, we are going to be able to identify those ions together with the color of the solution and the color they give to the flame when they're introducing one. In this lab, what we are going to do is a little bit different than in the past one. In this one, you're going to have to do your own observations on the video that we're going to provide you. On the first observation that you're going to perform, you're going to look at the color of the solution and the color of the flame for a particular metal. And by looking at those colors, you're going to fill up this table, starting from lithium all the way down to iron +3. Okay? And also the color of the flame that each one of those ions gives away. Proceeding with the first part, get something to write with and have at hand table 4.1 to record the color of the solutions. We will start on the same order as we have the ions set up on the table. So the first ion is going to be lithium. Take a look of it and write down the color. Remember, this is not white, this is colorless, okay? The second element is sodium. The third element is potassium. The fourth element is calcium. The fifth is strontium. Eighth is barium. Next is copper. Nickel. And iron. The next step in the experiment, and again, keep at hand something to write with and table number 4.1, is to take a look of the color that an element gives when it's introduced in a flame. For that, we're going to use this burner and a nichrome wire. We start with the first solution, which is lithium. After the first color, we have to clean the wire so that we don't mix the colors from different solutions. The next element, or the next ion, is sodium plus. After sodium comes potassium. In the case of potassium, don't pay too much attention to the yellow part of the color, but you see close or inside the yellow color, close to the wire. To help you here a little bit, because it's a hard color to see, it's a very tenuous violet color. Show you again, okay, there you can see it. Okay. Next element, first we clean the wire 2 times, and the next element is going to be calcium. Okay, here you can see the color better now. And that's calcium. Again, the next one, remember, first we need to clean the wire. Okay. Now comes strontium. Again. So that was strontium. We're cleaning the wire, remember, in between samples. Now comes barium. Okay, let's see it again. Remember that the color that you have to record is the one that you see right at the beginning when we put the iron, when we put the wire into the solution, okay? When we put the nichrome wire into the solution. Okay. After barium comes copper. Let's clean this a little bit more. again. That's a beautiful color, right? Copper. That was copper. Clean the wire. And now we have nickel. Finally, cleaning the wire now, so that's not a color of a solution. And that's iron. So that's it. Make sure to turn off the burner when you're done. After we have seen the color that each one of those ions gives to a solution and the color they give to a flame, the next step is to see how they react with ammonium hydroxide and how they react with ammonium sulfate. By using the solubility rules now, we can predict what's going to happen with the hydroxide of each one of those ions and what's going to happen with the sulfate of each one of those ions. The idea here is that we are going to do the reaction and you have to write down if you observe the formation of a precipitate or not. And that goes for the reaction with ammonium hydroxide and the reaction with ammonium sulfate. We start by using ammonium hydroxide. In the case of lithium, let's see what happens. Okay. Let's go to the second one, which will be sodium. The third one, potassium. The fourth one, calcium. This one, we're going to have it here settling for a little while and we will come back again to calcium, okay? Next one, strontium. We'll do the same in the case of strontium. Now comes barium. Then comes copper. After copper comes nickel. And after nickel, the last one, iron. Remember, the important thing here is that you have to tell if there was a formation of a solid or not. In this case, which is sodium, there is no formation of a solid. In the case of lithium and sodium, the same thing, okay? And potassium. I'll show you the three of them. No solid is being formed. In the case of strontium and barium, there is a cloudiness, okay? Cloudiness means that solid was formed. In the case of calcium, nothing happened. For copper, you see the grains, and for nickel, the same thing. The solution is not transparent anymore, which means that there is a solid floating on it. And in the case of sodium, you can see the solid particles sticking on the tube. This takes care of the second part of the experiment, which is the reaction with ammonium hydroxide. The next one is going to be with ammonium sulfate. The last reaction we are going to perform is with ammonium sulfate, and see what happens with the sulfates of each one of these ions that we have here. We start with lithium, and here is what happens with the lithium sulfate. See again. Sodium. Potassium. Calcium. We're going to come to calcium later on. Strontium. Wow. Barium. Wow. Copper. Nickel. And the last one, iron. As I said, we were going to come back to calcium. Look at that. So the first impression was not correct, right? This is the case where a reaction is slow and it takes a little bit of time for the precipitate to form. But again, here you have a precipitate. And that's about it in what we want to know about each one of these ions and how they react to ammonium hydroxide and ammonium sulfate. The last part of the lab has to do with the identification of 3 unknown samples. As I said before, the last part of this experiment has to do with the identification of unknowns. What you have to do now is, for each one of the unknowns, we're going to perform a reaction with ammonium hydroxide and reaction with ammonium sulfate. We're going to look at the color of the solution and the color it gives to the flame. And you're going to have to write each one of these observations, and from these observations you are going to have to guess which is the ion that is present in each one of those unknowns. We're going to label them A, B, and C. So write it down now: unknown A, unknown B, and unknown C. So we start with A. Okay, this is the unknown A. Look at the color of the solution and write it down. B. Color of the solution, write it down. And C. Color of the solution, and write it down. And now here we are to perform the flame color for each one of these unknowns. So we start with A. First, it's always a good idea to clean up the wire, the nitron wire. See, it still has some residues from our past experiments. Okay. And now, here we go with the first one. A. That's A. Do it again. Remember, the color you have to look at is the one that you see right at the beginning when you put the sample into the flame. So we're ready with A. And this is B now. Let's take a look again. B. Okay. Cleaning. Have a mixture of colors now. Cleaning again. And C. Let's do it again. Again. Looks like the wire hasn't been cleaned completely. Okay, now you have the color. Write it down again. Remember, it's the color that you see right at the beginning when you put the wire into the flame. So now we have the color of the solution and the color of the flame. Next step is to see how each one of them reacts with ammonium hydroxide and ammonium sulfate. First, we start with ammonium hydroxide. For A, see what happens. Nothing. Remember, if it's calcium or strontium, the hydroxide may form later, so it's better to wait a little bit before you draw a conclusion, okay? So let's leave it here for now. B. The same thing happens with this one. Let's leave it there for a little while. And C. And this is C. For now, let them settle a little bit, okay? Let's give them about 2 or 3 minutes. So after 2 minutes, we see that there is no formation of precipitate. So now we are sure that ammonium hydroxide doesn't react with these two cations. So the last step and the last part of this lab will be the reaction with ammonium sulfate and the unknowns. The first unknown, let's see what happens with ammonium sulfate. Nothing seems to happen. Strontium, formation of a precipitate. And with copper, nothing happens. Again, make sure that if there is no formation of precipitate, to go back and take a look of the solution. In this case, we have elapsed about a minute and a half of time, and you see that there is no precipitate formation. So the last part will be no formation of precipitate, and no formation of precipitate for each one of the unknowns. Next, what you have to do is to put together the pieces on this puzzle and identify each one of the 3 unknowns. And that will be the end for today's lab. Remember, you have to write now your lab report and hand it in by the due date that is posted in the calendar in Blackboard.